June 22, 1944. The German commanders along the Eastern Front were certain about one thing. The Soviet attack was coming in the south, in Ukraine. That's where Stalin's tank armies were massed. That's where the intelligence pointed. That's where Hitler had sent the reserves. So Germany did something unthinkable. They stripped the center bare. 16 days later, Army Group Center, one of the most powerful military formations in history, would cease to exist. To understand how this was even possible, you have to picture the front lines in the spring of 1944. Germany's Army Group Center held a massive bulge in Belarus, a salient that jutted eastward like an outstretched fist. Soviet planners called it the Belarus Balcony. From a defensive standpoint, it looked formidable. The flanks were anchored. The front was deep. The Germans had been holding this ground since 1941, and there was a compelling strategic logic that told Hitler the next Soviet blow would land elsewhere. His intelligence service, the Fremd Heer Ost, or Foreign Armies East, had spent months tracking Soviet troop movements. Their conclusion: Stalin would strike in Ukraine, driving toward Romania, toward the oil fields, toward the Balkans. The political and economic logic seemed airtight, so Hitler acted on that assessment. 1/3 of Army Group Center's artillery was transferred south, half the panzers, reassigned, 88% of the tank destroyers, gone. The generals defending Belarus watched their reserves disappear, piece by piece, over weeks. Field Marshal Ernst Busch, the commander of Army Group Center, was alarmed enough to send Hitler 2 separate withdrawal proposals on May 20. Pull back to the Dnieper, or fall back to the Berezina River. Either move would have shortened the front, freed reserves, created room to maneuver if, when, the blow came. Hitler rejected both. The fortress cities, Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, Bobruisk, would be held to the last man. No retreat, no flexibility, no reserves. Busch returned to his headquarters. He didn't know it yet, but his army group had just been sentenced to death. While Germany was looking south, the Soviets were executing one of the most sophisticated military deceptions in history. The Russians called it Maskirovka, from their word for mask. By 1944, after 3 years of catastrophic early war mistakes, the Red Army had turned deception into a precise science. Step 1. Leave the bait in place. The Soviets kept 4 tank armies exactly where German reconnaissance could see them, in Ukraine, visible, detectable, confirming every assumption the Germans had already made. It was a deliberate bluff: show the Germans what they wanted to see, and let their own bias do the rest. Step 2. In Belarus, assemble the real attack force in total silence. From June onward, an operation of staggering scale was executed in near-complete secrecy. Radio transmissions were banned. Units moved only at night, under tree canopy. Vehicle headlights were covered. Supply convoys wore the roads down to dusk with no headlights, no communication, no trace visible from the air. In absolute darkness, 2.3 million Soviet soldiers, 6,300 tanks, and 45,000 artillery pieces materialized in the forests of Belarus, and German intelligence registered almost nothing. German direction-finding units noticed something odd. Radio traffic from certain sectors had gone completely silent. Some frontline commanders flagged it as suspicious. Those reports were dismissed. The strategic verdict had already been handed down. The attack is coming in Ukraine. Then, on the night of June 19th, 3 days before the main assault, Soviet partisan units launched a coordinated attack on the German supply network behind Army Group Center. In a single night they struck over 10,000 separate points. Bridges demolished, rail lines torn up, supply depots burned. Army Group Center's logistical lifeline was severed before a single Soviet division had crossed the front line. June 23, 1944. 4 o'clock hours. 45,000 Soviet artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously across a 360-mile front. Eyewitness accounts from German soldiers described the ground shaking for miles in every direction. The barrage was so intense that some frontline positions were simply erased. Not overrun, erased, in the first hour. 4 Soviet fronts drove forward at once. The 1st Baltic, 2nd Belarusian, 3rd Belarusian, and 1st Belarusian fronts, each tasked with destroying a specific German army. The first fortress city to crack was Vitebsk. 3 Soviet armies converged on it from 3 directions simultaneously. By June 25, just 48 hours after the barrage began, Vitebsk was surrounded. Inside, 35,000 German soldiers of the 9th Corps, under General Friedrich Gallwitzer. Their commander sent desperate radio requests to Hitler. Authorize a breakout. The answer came back. Hold the fortress. Gallwitzer tried anyway, with a small force. Most of the 35,000 men who stayed behind died in the pocket. At Bobruisk, the German 9th Army faced a different kind of nightmare. Soviet fighter bombers, the Ilyushin IL-2, the most produced combat aircraft in history, flew continuous ground attack sorties over the retreating columns. German vehicles jammed the roads for miles. Horses, artillery pieces, supply trucks, ambulances, all locked together and unable to move. The IL-2s worked from one end of the column to the other, systematically. Survivors described columns that went silent over the course of a few hours. Not because the men had retreated, because they were dead. By June 28, 6 days into the offensive, the German 4th Army had been effectively destroyed. The 3rd Panzer Army had ceased to function as a coherent force. The 9th Army was fragmented into pockets, being systematically liquidated. Field Marshal Busch sent desperate messages to Hitler. He needed armored reinforcements from Army Group North Ukraine. He needed withdrawal authorization. He needed something. The reserves were not coming. The withdrawal orders were not coming. On June 28, exactly 6 days after the offensive began, Adolf Hitler relieved Field Marshal Ernst Busch of command. He was replaced by Field Marshal Walter Model, the Wehrmacht's most capable crisis commander. Known as Hitler's firefighter for his ability to stabilize collapsing fronts, Model flew to the headquarters, reviewed the maps, and immediately understood what he was looking at. There was nothing left to stabilize. The front was gone. By the end of June, Soviet armored columns were advancing at 20 kilometers per day, a pace that shocked even the Soviet commanders driving them. The German 4th Army, what remained of it, was attempting to fall back toward Minsk. But Soviet tank spearheads had already gotten ahead of the retreat. They were moving on roads. The Germans were moving on foot. The math was brutal and simple. General Kurt von Tippelskirch, commanding the remnants of the 4th Army, watched the trap close around him in real time. He ordered his men to break into small groups and move cross-country through the forests. Some made it, most didn't. On July 3, Soviet forces entered Minsk, the Belarusian capital, held by Germany since 1941, the administrative heart of the entire occupation, fell in a single day. Outside the city, approximately 100,000 German soldiers found themselves in what Soviet commanders called a kessel, a cauldron, surrounded on all sides, supplies gone, Soviet artillery tightening the ring from every direction. In Berlin, Wehrmacht operations officers stared at their maps in silence. Unit markers that had been there last week, gone. Entire army formations, erased. 28 divisions, hundreds of thousands of men, simply absent from the board. One German staff officer later wrote that it felt as if the rug had been pulled from under them, and the floor beneath was not there either. The scale of what had happened in 12 days was almost too large to process. In 2 weeks, the Soviet Union had inflicted more catastrophic losses on Germany than any single operation since Stalingrad. Army Group Center, one of 3 major German army groups in the east, had been functionally destroyed. The numbers: 28 of 34 divisions eliminated, an estimated 400,000 German casualties in the opening phase alone, the largest military defeat in German history. To demonstrate it to the world, Stalin organized a parade in Moscow on July 17. 57,600 German prisoners of war, captured in the opening weeks of the offensive, were marched through the streets of the Soviet capital in a column several miles long. The crowds that lined the streets didn't cheer. These were Soviet citizens who had lived through 3 years of German occupation, 3 years of starvation and slaughter. They watched in silence as the column passed, and when the last prisoner cleared the street, Moscow city workers followed behind with water carts, washing the pavement clean. Germany had lost more in 6 days than in months of fighting in Normandy, and the offensive was not over. In Part 2, we go inside the Minsk pocket, the desperate breakout attempts, the men who navigated by the setting sun, and the Soviet advance that didn't stop until it reached the outskirts of Warsaw. Operation Bagration is the campaign most people who think they know WW2 have never heard of. It's also the reason Nazi Germany lost the war. If this is new to you, subscribe. Part 2 drops tomorrow.